this is Amelia.
And I'm Eponym.
This video is our third installment for our Undercare series where we will be sharing some art making techniques on proportions.
I'll be teaching y'all how to accurately draw the proportions of a bottle, which will be useful for still life.
And I'll be sharing about how to accurately transfer images to your drawing through the grid technique.
First of all, what is proportion? Proportion refers to the relationship of the size of one element when compared to another. Proportions are important when doing still life drawings when you want to depict subject matter with accuracy to real life. Some examples of famous still life artists include Paul Cézanne, who is well known for his sketchy brushstrokes, and Giorgio Morandi, who is well known for his quiet and simplistic representations of subject matter. Most strikingly, pop artist Roy Lichtenstein employed his famous use of dots and comic book styles in his approach to still life.
On the topic of proportions, here's a helpful tip on transferring the image you want accurately onto your work surface, called the grid technique. The grid technique refers to drawing grids of equal ratio on both the reference image and the canvas to aid in transferring the image one square at a time. This will be demonstrated later in the video. This technique is used by many artists, such as Chuck Close. By drawing grids on the reference photo, one can use the grid lines as a guide to help section out the canvas. By breaking down the overall image into small sections, one can focus on one part of the image at each time instead of being overwhelmed by the entire picture. While many artists will erase the grid lines away after the initial sketch, Chuck Close interestingly goes a step further by incorporating the grid lines into the final work itself, as you can see on the right.
The golden ratio is referred to as the divine proportion used commonly by artists and architects since ancient Greece. The proportion is found in the growth patterns of nature, such as shells and plants. The golden ratio can also be used to achieve beauty, balance, and harmony in art and design. As you can see, it is present in the works of some of the greatest artists of the world, such as Leonardo da Vinci, Hokusai, and Michelangelo. As artists and sculptors express perfect harmony and beauty in the human body using the golden ratio, they have also distorted human proportions for expression of different ideas and feelings. For example, Swiss sculptor Alberto Giacometti creates slim, long sculptures of humans to express suffering and weakness. Furthermore, distortion of human proportion is not only used in fine art, but also in popular culture, especially in exaggerated caricature for humor, or to comment on social and political situations.
The use of proportions can also be seen in portrait works. For example, do you know that if you draw a line straight down from the inner corners of your eye, you'll find that the line will also touch the side of your nose? Proportions can also be seen in animals, as seen in the image on the right, as the horse's head can be used to gauge the size of its legs and body. Proportions can be seen in portrait works, such as the painting on the left by Jose Corella. It also extends to 3D art, such as sculptures as seen in Rodin's Mask of a Man with a Broken Nose and Waiting for the Rain by Joanna Motzon. As you can see, you can draw imaginary lines to mark out the proportions on the painting and the sculpture.
Firstly, I will be teaching you how to draw proportionately accurate objects by measuring their proportions with a pencil. As mentioned, this is extremely useful when you are doing still life drawings and want to get your objects as proportionally accurate to real life as possible. Today, I will be guiding you in drawing this bottle we have here. The first step is to hold out your pencil in front of you, facing where the bottle is. Turn your pencil horizontally, close one eye, and align the tip of the pencil to the edge of the bottle and mark the width of the bottle with your thumb. Then, turn your pencil vertically and you want to measure around how many times longer the length is as compared to its width. In this case, this bottle's length is slightly longer than 3 times its width. Now, we will draw a box on our paper that matches the same ratio as stated. We will first draw the base of the box. Then, measure with your pencil and make sure the length is 3 times longer than the width. As you are drawing your box, do make sure that your lines are parallel to the edges of the paper so that your bottle will not be slanted. At this point, also note that you should draw the lines lightly as they are only meant to serve as a guide for your actual drawing. Then, draw a line of symmetry vertically down the center of the box. Now, observe the bottle again and notice where the bottle reaches its widest point. Again, use your pencil to measure the length from the bottle's height to its widest point. When we compare it to the length below it, we can see that it is around the same length. Now that we know that the ratio is 1:1, we can draw a horizontal line across the center of the box. Then, notice this area below the bottleneck where there is a distinct curve. Once again, measure its length and compare it to the length of the bottle. In this case, the ratio of the length of the curve to the whole bottle is around 1:7.5. Draw another horizontal line to mark out this area. Then, measure the width of the top of the bottleneck and compare it to the width of the bottle base. We can see that it is around 1/3 the width of the bottle base. Do the same for the bottom of the bottleneck. Now mark the measurements down. Now we can start drawing the bottle. Starting from the cap, notice that the top is an oval, so we will draw it accordingly on our paper. Then, closely observe the bottle and you can see that there are 3 bumps at the top of the neck where the cap is. Draw them in, ensuring that they are symmetrical. Moving on to the neck, observe that it slants outwards towards the body of the bottle. Draw accordingly using the lines you marked out earlier as guides. Now, draw in the curves below the neck, following the shape of the bottle as closely as possible. Subsequently, we can darken the parallel sides of the bottle. As for the base of the bottle, it is not flat but oval in shape, so make sure that you draw the base of the bottle as an oval shape. Also ensure that the edges of the bottle are not sharp but round. Lastly, for the label wrapping around the bottle, draw it in following the curve of the base. After this, you can go ahead and darken the outline of the bottle and add in details if you'd like. The final drawing should look something like this, and it should look relatively proportional to the actual object. Now, here are some examples of still life drawings I did in year 1 using this technique. This technique definitely takes some practice, but once you have gotten the hang of it, you can go on to draw more complex objects such as teapots. I will leave you with a final tip on drawing still life, which is to draw what you observe and not what you perceive.
Now, as we have learned how to accurately draw proportions from still life, what happens if the reference picture is an image instead? This next section will teach you how to accurately transfer the proportions of your subject matter in your image to your blank piece of paper or canvas. Let us begin with the image. Here, I took an image of a tiger from Pinterest and printed it out onto a piece of paper. To draw the grids, a very important idea is that the sizes of the grid box must be kept constant throughout the entire paper. Here, I used a pencil to draw 3 lines of equal length horizontally and 4 lines vertically. As you can see, my reference photo of a tiger is neatly divided into 20 boxes with the boxes of equal size. Note that this is just a general rule of thumb for A4 images. For landscape-style images, you can flip the ratio to draw 4 vertical and 3 horizontal lines. Alternatively, if the image is of a unique scale, you can come up with your own number of grids. Just make sure that the lines are equally spaced out so that each box will be the same size. Next, let's move on to the blank paper. Similarly, on the paper, draw 20 boxes of the same size. If your reference photo is of a different size from your canvas, do not worry. Just make sure that they are of the same ratio. While drawing your grid lines, a tip is to draw the grid lines lightly by applying less pressure on your pencil when marking them out, so that when you erase the lines in the end, the grids will be less noticeable. Now, when the grids are drawn, the only step left is to transfer the image to the paper. Begin by marking out the main outline of the image. When doing this step, a tip is to look at each individual square when drawing. This allows you to see the image as shapes and lines. Here, the tiger's snout on the image is at the midpoint length of the grid square. Using this as a guideline, I start drawing the pattern at the midpoint of my image. By doing so, this will help you accurately draw out the overall image. As you can see, I constantly refer to the image and mark out points lying on the grid line. This makes it easier when transferring it onto the paper. After completing the sketch, I began shading and adding the final details. Beginning on the square with the tiger's eye, I drew and shaded in all the details seen in the square. Afterwards, I moved on to the next square on the side, and this continues on. Note that the squares are just guiding lines to help you in your drawing, and you shouldn't be constrained to complete whatever you see in one square first before moving on to the next. As you can see, my reference photo had patterns which often extend out of the individual box. In cases like these, I continued on shading in the patterns which extended out of the square I was working on. After each square is done, you can erase the grid lines that are still visible. The grid technique is good for images like these, as the fur patterns on the tiger look complicated and overwhelming. By breaking down the image into smaller sections, this makes it less overwhelming, and it also ensures that no pattern is left out. Also, the grid lines serve as helpful guides, as you can use the midpoint and intersection points of the grid to gauge where on the paper you should transfer the portion of the image to. After this step, the drawing is done. Here's the end product. Here are more examples of which I use proportions and the grid technique. This is my sketchbook where the grid technique was used to sketch out images of a sun bear. I had also used the techniques in other portrait works. This is another work I had done in year 1 when we were first exposed to Chuck clothes. Here, the grid lines are incorporated into the artwork. We hope that you had found our tutorials helpful. To recap what we have learned today, we've learned about proportions in art, such as the golden ratio, and how they are applied in still life artworks and portraits by famous artists. We have also learned how to accurately draw still life objects by measuring their proportions with a pencil, and the handy grid technique, which helps us accurately draw images from reference photos.
Thank you guys for watching our tutorials on proportion. We hope that you now have a better understanding of how to draw bottles for still life and how to use the grid technique for your works. See you!